He was 19 and homeless. No roof, no money, no plan, just a folded letter and $0 in unpaid fees standing between him and a dead walnut grove no one else wanted. People laughed. They said a boy who couldn't afford a bus ticket had no business claiming land. They said the grove had been dead for years, the trees were gone, the soil was no good, and whatever had once grown there wasn't coming back. But what they didn't know was that the ground beneath those bare, hollow trees was hiding something. Something buried. Something that had been waiting for exactly the right person to find it. And it was about to change everything. Chapter 1. The morning Marcus Webb turned 19, the shelter coordinator handed him a garbage bag and told him his bed was needed by noon. Not a handshake. Not a good luck. Just a black plastic bag and a clock ticking. He stuffed everything he owned inside it, 2 shirts, a broken phone charger, and a photograph he hadn't looked at in 3 years. The kind of photograph you keep not because it brings comfort, but because throwing it away feels like losing something you can't name. Outside, the air was cold and flat. The kind of cold that doesn't bite, it just settles in and stays. Marcus stood at the edge of the parking lot with nowhere to go and no one expecting him anywhere. He was 19. He was alone. And the world felt very, very large. Chapter 2. He almost didn't open it. The envelope had been sitting at the bottom of the garbage bag, slipped in by the front desk without a word, like an afterthought. Plain white. His name handwritten in ink that had faded to the color of weak tea. Inside was a single page from a county land office. A walnut grove, 11 acres, registered to a man named Gerald Webb, a grandfather Marcus had met exactly once, at a funeral, when he was 7 years old. The transfer fee was listed at the bottom. $0. Marcus read the line twice. Then a third time. Land didn't transfer for nothing. Things that cost nothing were usually worth exactly that. But he had nowhere else to be. He folded the letter. And decided to go see it for himself. Chapter 3. The bus ride took 3 hours. Marcus sat by the window and watched the city slowly unmake itself, billboards giving way to tree lines, traffic thinning into long empty stretches of cracked asphalt. The farther they traveled, the quieter everything became. Not a peaceful quiet. The kind that made a person aware of how much noise they'd been using to fill empty spaces. Somewhere past the second hour, he stopped thinking about the shelter. About the bed he no longer had. About every door that had closed before he'd even knocked. He just watched the land roll by and wondered, for the first time in a long time, what something might feel like before he'd already decided it would disappoint him. The bus slowed. A rusted water tower appeared through the pines. He had arrived. Chapter 4. Nothing could have prepared him for what he saw. The grove stretched out in a long, silent row, 11 acres of dead walnut trees standing like burnt matchsticks against a gray afternoon sky. No leaves. No canopy. Just bare, blackened trunks cracked down the middle, some leaning so far they nearly touched the ground. The soil between them was pale and hard, threaded with deep fissures like something underneath had dried up and pulled away long ago. A rusted wire fence sagged along the perimeter, half swallowed by weeds. Marcus let out a short, hollow laugh. This was the inheritance. This was the $0 that had brought him 3 hours from the city with a garbage bag and half a plan. He stood there for a long moment, just breathing. Then he ducked under the fence and walked in anyway. Chapter 5. He walked the length of the grove twice. It didn't get better the second time, every tree he passed looked more defeated than the last. Hollow at the base. Bark peeling back in long gray strips. One had split completely down the center, both halves falling away from each other like something had pushed through from inside and given up halfway. Marcus stopped near the middle of the property and stood very still. A voice in the back of his mind, calm, practical, familiar, told him to leave. That this was exactly what he should have expected. That hope built on a letter from a stranger was still just hope built on nothing. He could walk back to the road. Flag the bus. Let someone else figure out what to do with 11 acres of dead land. His feet didn't move. Chapter 6. That's when he noticed the ground. Not all of it. Just one spot, roughly 10 feet ahead, near the base of the largest dead tree in the row. The soil there looked different. Darker. Slightly raised, like the earth had been disturbed and packed back down by someone who knew what they were doing but didn't want it to be obvious. Marcus moved toward it slowly. The closer he got, the more wrong it looked. The rest of the grove was pale and cracked and dry. But this patch, no bigger than a doorway, was a different color entirely. Almost deliberately so. He crouched down and pressed his palm flat against the surface. The ground was firm. Cold. But just beneath the soil, his fingers caught the edge of something solid. Rigid. Not rock. Not root. He brushed the surface clear with the side of his hand. A corner appeared. Wood. Dark with age. Deliberately shaped. Marcus sat back on his heels and stared. Chapter 7. He dug with his hands. There was no shovel, no tool, just fingers scraping through cold, packed earth until the outline became clear. A steel box, roughly the size of a large suitcase, sealed at the edges with a thick rubber gasket that had kept the moisture out for what looked like a very long time. There was no lock. Just a latch, stiff with age. Marcus worked it loose and lifted the lid. Inside, sealed in heavy plastic sheeting, were three things. The first was a stack of documents, survey maps, soil reports, and handwritten analysis notes spanning nearly 2 decades. Page after page of careful, methodical research in faded ink. His grandfather's name was on every single one. The second was a leather journal, thick and worn at the corners. The third stopped him completely. Beneath the journal, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with twine, were hundreds of individually labeled seed packets. Heirloom black walnut seeds. Rare cultivars. Varieties Marcus had never heard of, but the notes inside the plastic sheeting made their value impossible to ignore. Words like regionally extinct and commercially irreplaceable appeared again and again. Marcus sat back in the dirt. His grandfather hadn't abandoned this land. He had been quietly, carefully saving it, seed by seed, note by note, waiting for someone willing to see what everyone else had already written off. The grove wasn't dead. It had just been waiting. Chapter 8. The journal fell open to the first page on its own, like it had been opened there many times before. But it wasn't a journal entry. It was a letter. Marcus. If you're reading this, you made it to 19. That alone tells me everything I needed to know about you. Marcus read the line twice. His chest tightened in a way he didn't have a word for. I couldn't come for you. I want you to understand that before anything else. Not because I didn't want to, because the people who had legal claim over your life made it impossible. I tried. There are papers in this box that prove I tried. But the system is patient in ways that people aren't, and I ran out of time before I ran out of trying. So I did the only thing left. I protected this land. I documented everything. And I buried it where only someone patient enough, stubborn enough, would find it. The seeds are worth more than anyone in this county knows. But that's not why I left them. I left them because I knew you'd understand what it means to be written off before you've had the chance to grow. Marcus closed the journal slowly and sat in the dirt for a long time. Chapter 9. The truck appeared the following morning. A clean, white pickup with a corporate logo on the door, an agricultural development company whose name Marcus had never heard but whose manner he recognized immediately. The man who stepped out was polished, unhurried, and spoke in the careful tone of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted without ever asking directly. He knew about the grove. He knew about the soil reports. He slid a folded offer across the hood of the truck without being asked. Marcus looked at the number. It was more money than he had ever seen attached to his name. The man gave him a card and said to think about it. Said the land had potential but that developing it properly required resources Marcus simply didn't have. Said it gently. Almost kindly. Marcus pocketed the card without a word. But as the truck pulled away, something in him went very quiet and very certain. He wasn't selling. Chapter 10. He went back to the box. Spread the survey maps across the ground and read every page of his grandfather's notes from the beginning. Not skimming. Reading. The way you read something when you understand that the person who wrote it paid a price you can't fully measure. The soil wasn't dead. It was depleted. There was a difference, one his grandfather had documented in careful detail, along with exactly what it would take to bring it back. Marcus didn't have equipment. He didn't have capital. He didn't have a single person in his corner. What he had was 11 acres, a steel box full of irreplaceable seeds, and 2 decades worth of research written specifically for him. He folded the maps. Slid them back into the box. Then he walked to the nearest town to find out where a person bought a shovel. Chapter 11. The first 3 weeks were brutal. He slept in a second-hand tent pitched at the edge of the property. He ate cheap and worked long, breaking up the hardened soil by hand, row by row, clearing deadwood, testing pH levels using a kit he'd watched 3 tutorial videos to understand. His hands cracked. His shoulders burned in ways he hadn't known shoulders could burn. But somewhere in the 5th week, something shifted. Not in the land, not yet. In him. He stopped counting the hours. Stopped measuring the distance between where he was and where he needed to be. He just worked. Steadily. Quietly. The way his grandfather's notes described someone who understood that real things don't grow on urgency. They grow on patience. Chapter 12. One morning, deep into the 2nd month, Marcus knelt at the base of the first row and pressed his fingers into the soil. It was different. Darker. Looser. Alive in a way it hadn't been before. He sat back and looked out across the grove, all 11 acres of it. Still bare. Still quiet. But no longer dead. He thought about his grandfather. About a man who had been written off, just like him. Who had responded not with bitterness but with preparation. Marcus understood something then, simply and completely. Being abandoned and being forgotten are not the same thing. Some people love you in ways that outlast their ability to stay. Chapter 13. By the following spring, the first seedlings had broken through. Small. Tentative. Reaching. Have you ever inherited something that looked worthless at first glance, and almost walked away from it? A situation, a place, a part of yourself that everyone else had already written off. Marcus Webb was homeless at 19. He was handed 11 acres of dead land by a grandfather he barely knew. And what he found buried beneath it wasn't just seeds or research or money. It was proof that someone had seen him, fully, quietly, completely, long before he had learned to see himself. Sometimes the things most worth tending are the ones that have simply been waiting for someone patient enough to stay. Maybe that person was always going to be you. If this story meant something to you, if you believe in second chances, in stubborn hope, in roots that run deeper than they appear, subscribe and stay with us. There are more stories worth planting. Share in the comments, what's something in your own life you almost gave up on, but didn't?